Good afternoon. My name is Lillian Hodieb, and I'm a fresh doctor in linguistics. I defended my PhD thesis at INALCO in Paris in December 2020, and my thesis was about the description of Wushi, a grassroots Bantu language spoken in Cameroon in the Anglophone region. In my thesis, I proposed a grammatical description of Wushi, which is an underdocumented language, and I also proposed a lexicon of the language. For future research, I would like to produce more documents in Wushi and in other underdocumented languages. Now I will share my screen with you. So today the topic of my presentation is Indigenous languages used in Cameroon, the extension of the colonial rule by the dichotomy between the Anglophone and the Francophone communities. After introducing Cameroon, I will present the surveys on which this presentation is based, then the results, and then I will conclude. The Republic of Cameroon is located in the west central part of Africa. Its population is made up of about 20 million people. In the 15th century, the Portuguese discovered the Vuri River full of shrimps. And in Portuguese, the name for shrimp is camarão, hence the name Cameroon that was given to the whole land. After the Portuguese, the British came, followed by the German and then the French. When Germany lost the First World War, they had to give way to the British and the French, who shared the territory. The French had about 70% of the territory, and the British had the rest. So today, after the independence, which took place in 1960, English and French are the official languages. Concerning the indigenous languages, there are about 250, but none of them has the official status. They are national languages. It's important to mention the Anglophone crisis, which is a civil war that broke out in 2016 and still today is causing thousands of people to perish and to seek refuge in different towns of the country and even in Nigeria. This crisis is due to the conflict between the government and a group of Anglophone people who want to depart from Cameroon and create their own independent state. This Anglophone war is a major concern to the whole nation and especially to the Anglophone community. The first survey was carried out among the Francophones, and its results are published in a Brazilian journal in 2020. The second survey was carried out among the Anglophone community, and 22 people responded. 32 people responded for the first survey. Now let's get into the questions. The first one, what is your mother tongue? For Francophones, for the majority of them, French is their mother tongue. Whereas for Anglophones, they consider a Cameroon language as their mother tongue for the majority of them. So here we already see a big difference between the two. The second question, how often do you use it? For Francophones, they use it regularly. And for Anglophones also, they use it every day for most of them. The third question, do you speak a Cameroon language? For 59% of Francophones, they only manage, so they don't speak a Cameroon language well. Yet, for Anglophones, 59% speak a Cameroon language very well. Here again, we see the difference between the two groups of people. Which language do you speak with your parents now? For Francophones, 90% use French with their parents, and for Anglophones, 72% use a Cameroonian language. Here again, we see the dominance of French on one part and the dominance of indigenous languages on the other. Which language do you speak the most with your siblings? For Francophones, it's French, which is the most the language that is the most used with siblings. And with Anglophones, we see a particular paradigm here with the introduction of Pidgin English. Indeed, it's significant to see that 27% use a Cameroon language with their siblings and 22% Pidgin English with their siblings. 50%, which is the majority, use English. Which language did you speak the most at home when you were a child? For Francophones, it is French, or it was French. And for Anglophones, 59% say they used to speak a Cameroon language at home, or they are still speaking a Cameroon language at home more than any other language. So this is also very interesting to see how even in the family circle, the difference between the use of language is represented between the two communities. The seventh question, which language do you feel the most attached to? For Francophones, 59% feel most attached to French. So the majority of Francophones feel attached to French more than to indigenous languages. However, 25% have the same attachment with French and with indigenous languages. However, for Anglophones, we have 54.5% who feel attached to English and the Cameroon language equally, in an equal way. So they have the same attachment for these two languages. And this is very interesting too. And 27% of Anglophones feel equally attached to Pidgin English and English. Here again, we see there is a complex relationship between English, Pidgin English, and indigenous languages. And we'll discuss more about it later. Are you ashamed of your mother tongue? For Francophones, only a few don't know if they are ashamed of their mother tongue, but most of them are not. And for Anglophones, it's a 100% no, we're not ashamed of our mother tongue. That is our indigenous languages. Question 9, would you like your children to speak a Cameroonian language? For Francophones, we see a minority who say no, they don't find it necessary for children to speak a Cameroonian language, although the majority says yes, it is. And for Anglophones, it is a 100% yes, we would like our children to speak a Cameroonian language. Why? Okay, when we look at the different responses, you see that it's generally for cultural and identity reasons. Yet we can see that with the last response, some people find it not necessary. It's not a necessity. For Anglophones, all of them think it is necessary for the children to speak a Cameroon language for identity and for cultural sake. Now, what these surveys reveal is that first, there is a greater attachment to and use of Cameroonian indigenous languages in the Anglophone community than in the Francophone community. Then, Pidgin English occupies a significant place in the Anglophone community. 27.3% feel equally attached to English and Pidgin English. So we did see that Pidgin English is not only a lingua franca, but it participates in the construction of the identity in the Anglophone community. And none of the two groups is ashamed of their indigenous languages. However, there are more Anglophones in favor of passing down languages to children than Francophones. Now, in conclusion, if we were to arrange these languages according to the degree of use and to the degree of attachment, for Francophones, we would have the following. So in a descending order, first, French. French is the language that is the most used and the one people identify the most with. At the second position, Indigenous languages. For the Anglophone community, the first language would be Indigenous languages. Indeed, we saw that it's the language people feel the most attached to, although we also have English and Pidgin English. But from the responses, Indigenous languages are strongly identified with in this community. Then secondly, we have Pidgin English, and thirdly, English. And English, although there is a certain distance between the Anglophones and English, this language is much used. Now, we see there is a clear dichotomy between Francophones and Anglophone and the use and the place of Indigenous languages. And this dichotomy is the extension of the colonial pattern. Indeed, as we said in the beginning, in the introduction, Cameroon was colonized by French and English powers. And although both of them made use of chiefs to rule on their territories, the nature and position of these chiefs were totally different between the two systems. And also, the British had an indirect rule policy, whereas the French had an assimilation policy. Crowder, in his paper published in 1964, explains the fundamental differences between these two systems well. And here I will quote an extract of this paper. The British believed that it was their task to conserve what was great in indigenous institutions and assist them to develop on their own lands. The relation between the British political officer and the chief was in general that of an advisor who only in extreme circumstances interfered with the chief and the native authority under him. The French system placed the chief in an entirely subordinate role to the political officer. So, in the French system, we had this aim that was to create French citizen. And French citizen mean French culture, French identity, French mentality, French language. Whereas with the British, they were inspired by the concept of separate development for their African territories. So they had a certain respect for traditional and original culture and identity. And therefore, these were somehow preserved by the people. Whereas in the French territories, these cultural and identity values were somehow alienated and eradicated and supplanted by the French culture. Now, paradoxically, most of the endangered languages are located in the southwest and northwest regions of Cameroon. But this is partly explained by the fact that most of the linguistic description that were done were focused on the French or the Francophone communities. And it's only since the 1960s and 1970s that linguistic descriptions have been considering languages spoken in the Anglophone region. And so today we hope more documentation will be available not only in the Anglophone community but also in the Francophone region for the preservation of these languages. And it's also important to sensitize the people on the importance of the preservation of their language, because the loss of a language is the loss of the whole world. I thank you for your attention.